Hi there, Mark here again, and welcome to this, which is part 2 of my build guide for the DT02 chassis. It will eventually become a holiday buggy, but if you're building a DT02 then you should be able to follow along. The parts are all the same. Last time we got this far, we got the front and the rear suspension mostly completed, and these two assemblies, and now it's time to open parts bag B and carry on with the build. So step 14, which is the damper assembly or making up the shocks. I've already made up one of the front shocks. They look something like this. There's a bit of resistance in there because there's a bit of rubber tubing that you're going to need to cut that gives you a bit of friction. So they are proper friction dampers. They don't work brilliantly, but they are better than some of the what I would call pogo sticks. So I'll just quickly show you how to do the rear one. The process is exactly the same. As I say, get your piece of rubber tubing. You've got this guide down here. Cut to the right length, as you can see, match it up with the diagram, get your shock body, which for this one I think is an F3 for the rear, and we pop that in, put a bit of grease inside that tube. The rear shaft is basically a screw, which is BB5. We're going to pop that down the middle there, and what you need to do is get this spring on, and then you've got the lower shock mount, which is this, and you need to screw that into that hole. It's a bit fiddly, so I find the best thing to do is get something to poke through that lower hole so you can hold it steady, and then get your screwdriver into the head there and just guide that into that bottom hole. And yeah, it's quite tight to do up, this is, and just say it's a bit tricky, but yeah, screw that so the thread is all the way into the body. Okay, once you've done that, get part F1, which is the top cap. It only goes in one way, there's a little key there, and then you've got your 10mm self tapper, just goes in that hole there and holds it all together. And there you go, there is your friction shock. Well, having done all that, I'm not going to be using those. I'm going to be using these. Now, these are a used set of CVA shocks that I think were off my Neo Scorcher, which I upgraded the shocks on years ago. So they have been used. Yeah, they're not too pretty. I've got different colours on here, but you can definitely see there's some damp in there. And the oil dampers are far superior to the friction dampers, so I will be putting these on basically for performance. So yeah, that's what I'm going to do. Straight on to step 15, which is attaching the rear dampers. As you can see, I've already used the step screws here and fitted the top of the shocks onto part C2, which is the rear damper stay. So that's that done. All we've got to do now is get the rear assembly that we did earlier, and then we've got to fit this on there with 4 10mm self tappers into obviously the 4 holes. So we'll just get those in and do those up. Word of warning, this is really quite tight to get these into this. This is really hard plastic, and yeah, you need a bit of force to get these screws in. So once you've done those 4 screws up, the last thing to do for this step is just to get the bottom of your shocks there, get your step screws, and you want to screw that into the outside of the 2 holes in the lower wishbones, or A-arms as they're called by Tamiya. Okay, so once you've done that, you should have fully working rear suspension. So in step 16, we're going to get the front shocks on. As I said before, obviously I'm using the CVA dampers, and if you just look further on in the manual, you can see in the hop-up options in the manual the CVA dampers which I've got, and apparently they're a straight fit. Well, not as I've just found out they're not. Now it's going to be difficult to show the problem here. It may be because I've used these off another Tamiya kit, not the standard CVA dampers that you can buy, the black ones, but I think they are very similar. Anyway, the problem being is that when you fit this in, the top here, or which is located at the bottom now of the shock, catches on the A-arm or the wishbone. I don't know if you can see in here, I've had to shave away at this bit of plastic here It's right down here in the bottom wishbone, just around the edge of where the top of that shock was catching. So yeah, hobby knife and just shaved a bit away, and it now does fit. So just a little word of warning in case you are trying to fit this mod. Anyway, to get on with this, what we need is this screw pin, and you need this little brass spacer that goes through the top of the shock, which in this case, like I said, is now the bottom, and you've got to get that located in the hole in the wishbone or A-arm. And once you've got it in place, you can just pop in that pin. Then all we need is your step screw and attached to the top mount. So there you go, that's attached, and obviously once you've done that, do exactly the same for the other side. And again, now we should have fully working front suspension. Step 17 is attaching the battery cover, which is this here, and all you need is parts D4, which is that one there, which is the part that's going to hold the R-clip, hold it down. And you've got two of these D3s, you can see there, and you just need the 4 10mm self-tappers, and just screw in to the chassis like that. Simple as that. Oh, nearly forgot, you need to put a bit of foam tape there between those two mount holes. You can see this tape, just cut that to size and stick it down, and that just stops dirt and debris getting caught underneath the servo saver. So step 18, it says, is the RC unit, and I do recommend that you do this step. Don't miss this out, because if you don't do this and centre up your servo, you're going to have a lot of trouble later on. So what you need to do is get it all connected up, get your battery connected to your ESC, you've got your on-off switch, you've got your receiver, and you've got your servo. Any standard size servo will do. You don't need to go crazy with like a 25 kilogram or anything. I think this is just a 3 kilogram servo, it should be fine. And connect your servo into port 1 and your ESC into port 2 of your receiver. Simply switch everything on. You can see it's lit up there, and what you need to do is get your transmitter and give that servo a good flick to the left and right and make sure it centres up, and then we're all set to put on the servo saver, which is the next step. So for step 19, the first thing you want to do is get part P2, which is this plastic part, and then you want to put in your 2 ball joints, which are BB10. You can see them there. You secure those with these tiny little 2mm lock nuts. Quite simple, just put those in the positions as you can see. Once you've done that, you need to find out which part fits your servo, P5 or P6, which is this bit, and then you need the spring P4, and you simply click that onto that part, and then push part P2 on top, and that's step 19. Step 20 is simply fitting that onto your servo, so make sure you get the servo aligned as it shows down here. So you want the drive on the right hand side, and then you fit that as near to upright as you can. You never get it exactly right, it just depends on how the splines are on the servo itself. So that's about as close as I can get it. Then you want part P1, which is that tiny kind of plastic washer, goes in the middle, and then whatever screw fits your servo. They give you a selection, you should find one that fits. Step 21 is just fitting the plastic posts to the servo, which is just 2 10mm screws and the associated washers as it shows in the diagram. It should look like this. And depending on the receiver you've got, you might be able to do this part, which is putting these parts M4, BB3 and M3, you can see that, onto your switch. This is a TBL-E02, so those fit that switch, but I know some ESCs don't come with a switch that is compatible for this. On to step 22, time to open parts bag C. So for this you'll need the 2 threaded bars, which are BC3 and BC2, and you'll need the 5mm ball end adjusters. I think you'll have 2 of these spare, so yeah, don't throw those away, they'll come in useful in the future. So all you need to do is thread one of the adjusters onto each end of the bars of each bar. You can do them up against each other like this, and you need to screw them in until you match up to the length of the diagram. As you can see, they both match up with the diagram now, and make sure you've got the orientation of the ball ends correct. So you've got that one will be flat like that, and the other one is at 90 degrees to it, and the same with the shorter one. And then with your servo in this position, you put the longer arm on the left hand side ball and the shorter one on the right hand side. And on to step 23, where we're going to fit this into the chassis. So get your servo with the servo saver pointing upwards, and basically pop that into the front of the chassis. If you turn it over, you've got these two holes here, and you've got to get in a 10mm screw and a washer to hold onto those posts. So obviously you do up the screw that's into the just single hole first, and then after that do up the one that's into the slot, otherwise you won't be able to get the first one in. And the diagram also shows fitting that ESC switch with two 10mm screws into this slotted hole here. And although the diagram shows fitting the ESC on the top there and the receiver on the side at the bottom, I'm not actually going to do that because my cable isn't really long enough to route round the back out the way, and I don't want it going over the top of the battery strap. So I'm going to put my receiver on the same side. I don't think it really matters because the receiver weighs nothing anyway, so it's not going to affect the handling or anything like that. So I'll just get these tidied up now. So that's the electronics fitted. I think it looks okay. Tidied up the cables as best I can by wrapping them up with a bit of tape where they're a bit too long. Yeah, that's quite a neat fitment there. So we'll go straight on to 24, where we're going to fit the front suspension. Just turn it upside down, and I'm going to mount that on there with 3 countersunk screws. Like so, and just get those done up. Once you've done that, you can connect up your 2 tie rods. And then we need to fit part C1, which is like a top brace. It goes on there. It should click into place, and we secure that with 4 of the 10mm self-tappers. So there they are. You might need to just push the front shock assembly backwards a little bit, the damper assembly, just so you can get these screws in the holes. So yeah, get that done up, and that's the end of step 24. Step 25 is attaching the gearbox and rear shock assembly, and that goes onto this bottom plate here, and you screw that from underneath with 4 of those countersunk 10mm screws. There they are. So just get those done up, and then to finish this step we need to secure the top with 2 of your ordinary 10mm self-tappers. One in that hole and one in that hole. Okay then, it's looking a bit more like a buggy now, isn't it? Really enjoying this build. It's been nice and simple but great fun at the same time. It's gone together really nicely. So last couple of steps to show you now before we finish this part of the build guide. So we've got 26 and 27. We've got setting up the steering, which is simply a case of getting the 2 axles so they're kind of in line with each other in a straight line. You can have a little bit of toe in or toe out if you want to. Simply pop one of the ball ends off, either screw it in or screw it out to adjust the length, and that will adjust the steering, and as I say, get it so that it's how you want it. I've got a tiny little bit of toe in on that, which is what I prefer. Okay, and 27 is just basically putting the wheels on. So, oh yeah, and there's also the front body mount. So I'll just go through that now. So the front body mount is this part H2. That just mounts with a 10mm screw and a washer, and it just goes in that hole there, which is in the middle of the shock towers. For the rear wheels you need your bushing or your bearing, your 12mm hex adapter and your little drive pin. So just pop that bearing over the shaft. You can push the bearing in with the hex adapter. Pop your pin through the little hole in the shaft. Put in your adapter, making sure that the pin aligns in the slot. Take your wheel and tyre and make sure that slots over the hex adapter, and attach that with a flanged lock nut. Okay, the front one's a piece of cake. 2 bearings or bushings, one on each side of the wheel. These tend to be a bit of a loose fit, so don't worry if they drop out, that's quite normal. Simply place over the shaft, the front wheel shaft, and another flanged lock nut. And obviously repeat for the other side. And there is the finished chassis. Doesn't it look great? I'm really chuffed with that, I've got to say. It looks really nice, and it all feels like it's quite solid. The tub itself is really quite rigid, and I've just tested these shocks with a bit of a drop test, and hopefully you can see it's a nice thud as it drops, no bounce whatsoever, and the back, not too bad at all. A little bit of bounce there, maybe I could put a little bit more preload on, but other than that, yep, that's pretty good. So thanks for following along. I hope you enjoyed this quick little build, and I hope you join me on part 3 where we're going to get that lovely bodywork done. All the best. Cheers.